The room went silent not because a voice had been raised, but because a lifetime of fear had finally found something it could not crush. Plates stopped midair, breath caught in throats, and even the polished lights above seemed to hesitate as the new waitress stood rigid, eyes steady, facing them, and everyone whispered about the millionaire whose presence alone had trained people to shrink. In that moment, with her apron still creased from the morning and her hands trembling despite her resolve, she did not look powerful, but she looked unmovable, and that was enough to make him fall silent in front of everyone. Before the story pulls you deeper into what led to that moment, take a second to support this channel. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the quiet strength of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, please like this video, comment your thoughts, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to the channel Acts That Matter. Your support helps stories like this reach hearts that are still waiting to heal. For years, the restaurant had been known not for its food but for the men who sat at the corner table every Thursday evening. He arrived alone, always at the same time, always dressed in sharp suits that carried the scent of money and distance. He was a self-made millionaire, feared not because he shouted, but because he did not need to. A raised eyebrow, a slow look of disappointment, or a single cold sentence was enough to make seasoned staff stumble over their own hands. Waiters dreaded his arrival. Managers hovered like nervous shadows. Customers nearby lowered their voices, as if wealth had its own gravity. No one knew much about him beyond the rumors, ruthless deals, broken partnerships, lawsuits that left entire companies hollowed out. What everyone knew for sure was that when he walked in, the warmth of the room faded. The staff had learned survival through silence. Mistakes were avoided at all costs, and when they happened, apologies came quickly and left bruises that were never spoken of again. Some had quit after just one encounter with him. Others stayed because they needed the job more than their pride. The restaurant itself felt like a stage where everyone knew their role, and his table was the spotlight no one wanted to stand under. Fear became routine, and routine made it feel normal. Then the new waitress arrived, carrying nothing but a thin resume, tired eyes, and a past that had already taught her what real fear felt like. Her name was Mara, and she had started only a week earlier. She moved carefully, as if the world had taught her that sudden movements invited punishment. She listened more than she spoke, learned quickly, and worked harder than anyone expected. What no one noticed at first was that she carried a quiet resilience shaped by nights spent worrying about rent, by mornings where hope was optional, and by losses that never made the news. Mara had not always worn an apron. Once, she had dreamed of a life built on effort and fairness. She had believed that if you showed up honestly, the world would eventually meet you halfway. That belief had been tested when her father fell ill and medical bills swallowed their savings. It cracked further when she lost her previous job after standing up for a coworker who had been blamed for a manager's mistake. Doing the right thing had cost her everything she had built. By the time she walked into this restaurant, she was not looking for justice or recognition. She was looking for stability, for a chance to breathe. On her second Thursday, she was assigned to the section near the corner table. The manager hesitated, then decided it was better for the new girl to learn early. Others avoided her eyes, not out of cruelty but out of pity. They knew what that table could do to a person. Mara noticed the tension immediately. She felt it in the way the air thickened, in the way hands shook just a little more, in the way smiles became forced. She asked no questions. She had learned that sometimes questions only made things worse. As the evening unfolded, the millionaire arrived as expected. The room adjusted itself around him. Mara watched from a distance, absorbing details. The way he scanned the room as if measuring it. The way his posture never softened. She noticed something else too, something others had missed in their fear. Beneath the composure was a man carrying exhaustion so deep it had settled into his bones. His eyes were sharp, but they were also lonely. It did not excuse his behavior, but it made her pause. When it was time to serve him, Mara approached with steady steps. Her heart beat loudly in her ears, but her face remained calm. She had learned long ago that fear sensed weakness. She focused on the simple things, the weight of the tray, the smell of coffee, the sound of her own breathing. The order was taken without incident, but as she turned away, an accident happened. A minor slip, barely noticeable, but enough for a few drops to spill. It was the kind of mistake that would have earned someone a humiliating lesson. The room held its breath. This was the moment everyone knew too well. Apologies usually followed, sometimes tears, sometimes anger swallowed whole. But Mara did not rush into rehearsed submission. She stopped, grounded herself, and acknowledged the spill with calm efficiency. She cleaned it carefully, her movements respectful but not frantic. She did not plead. She did not shrink. She acted as someone who understood responsibility without surrendering dignity. That alone unsettled him. He looked at her, truly looked, perhaps for the first time seeing a person instead of a service. Something in her posture, in her refusal to crumble, disrupted the familiar pattern. He waited for the fear he expected, but it did not arrive. The silence stretched, uncomfortable and heavy. Staff watched from afar, their own anxiety rising. Mara finished cleaning and met his gaze. Not defiantly, not submissively, but honestly. In that instant, years of unspoken pain surfaced inside her. She saw not a millionaire, but a man who had likely never been told no without resentment, who had never been forced to face the consequences of how his presence crushed rooms. Without raising her voice, without dramatics, she spoke from a place of truth shaped by loss and endurance. She expressed accountability for the mistake, but she also set a boundary, one rooted in self-respect. She did not ask for forgiveness as a favor. She offered it as part of being human. The effect was immediate and profound. The man who had silenced boardrooms, who had reduced adults to trembling apologies, found himself without a response. His mouth opened, then closed. His authority, so carefully constructed over decades, had no place to land. For the first time in years, he was not being feared or flattered. He was being met. Memories he had buried stirred. A younger version of himself, struggling, overlooked, once dismissed by people with power who never bothered to see him. He remembered what it felt like to be invisible, to be small. Somewhere along the way, he had become the very thing he once resented, mistaking control for strength. The silence around him was no longer obedience. It was reflection. The room slowly exhaled. No one spoke. No one moved. And then, almost imperceptibly, the tension eased. He nodded, not as a king granting mercy, but as a man acknowledging another. The transaction ended not with humiliation, but with understanding. He returned to his meal quieter than before, and something unseen but important shifted in the space between tables. Word spread quickly among the staff, not in gossip but in disbelief. The unthinkable had happened. Someone had stood her ground, and the world had not ended. Mara returned to her duties, her hands still shaking now that the moment had passed. She did not feel victorious. She felt drained, but also lighter, as if a weight she had carried for years had finally loosened its grip. In the weeks that followed, changes rippled outward. The millionaire continued to come, but his demeanor softened. He noticed names. He waited when things were busy. His presence no longer froze the room. The staff stood a little taller. The manager smiled more easily. And Mara, without realizing it, became a quiet symbol of what courage could look like when it was rooted in self-worth rather than defiance. One evening, after closing, the manager shared news that left everyone stunned. The men at the corner table had made a significant investment, not in the restaurant itself, but in a fund to support employees pursuing education or emergency relief. There was no press release, no public credit. It was simply done. When asked why, he offered no explanation. But those who had seen that moment of silence understood. Something had been given to him that money could not buy. Mara's life did not transform overnight into a fairy tale. She still worked long hours. She still worried about the future. But something inside her had shifted permanently. She no longer believed that survival required shrinking. She had learned that even in spaces defined by power imbalance, humanity could still speak and be heard. Her courage did not come from being fearless. It came from choosing honesty over submission, even when the cost was unknown. As time passed, other customers noticed the warmth of the place. The restaurant became known again for its food, its atmosphere, its people. Fear loosened its grip, replaced slowly by mutual respect. And at the center of it all was a simple truth proven in one quiet, electric moment: real power does not need to dominate, and real strength does not need permission. If this story touched something inside you, if it reminded you of a time you wished you had spoken up or a moment you found the courage to do so, please take a moment now to engage with this video. Like it, share it, and let others find this reminder that dignity can change rooms, hearts, and even lives. The silence that followed that evening did not disappear when the lights dimmed and the chairs were stacked. It lingered, settling into corners of the restaurant and into the minds of everyone who had witnessed it. For Mara, the walk home felt heavier than usual, not because of fear, but because something old inside her had been stirred awake. The city streets glowed with tired yellow lights, and every step echoed with memories she had spent years trying not to revisit. Standing up had not been planned. It had risen from somewhere deeper than thought, from a place shaped by nights of hunger, by promises broken quietly, by the slow realization that dignity was not something the world handed you, but something you had to protect with your own hands. She replayed the moment again and again, wondering if she had crossed a line, if consequences were simply delayed. Experience had taught her that courage often came with a price tag. She had paid it before. Jobs lost, doors closed, names quietly erased from lists. As she unlocked her small apartment, the familiar creak of the door greeted her like an old friend. The space was modest, sparsely furnished, but it was hers. She sat on the edge of the bed and let the exhaustion finally catch up, her body trembling now that it no longer had to be strong. Across town, the millionaire sat alone in a penthouse that overlooked a city he had conquered but never truly known. The silence there was different, vast and echoing, padded by expensive furniture and walls lined with achievements that no longer brought satisfaction. He had built his life on precision, control, and the belief that respect was something extracted through pressure. That night, however, something had slipped through the armor. A simple moment, delivered without anger or apology, had reached a place untouched by contracts and balance sheets. He stood by the window, watching traffic flow like veins of light, and felt a tightness in his chest he could not name. Memories surfaced uninvited. A childhood marked by instability, by watching his own parents bend under the weight of people who held power over them. He remembered swearing he would never be weak, never be at the mercy of anyone again. Somewhere along the path to success, that vow had hardened into something cruel. Strength had become synonymous with intimidation, and respect had been confused with fear. Sleep came late for both of them that night. For Mara, it was restless, filled with half-remembered dreams where she was standing in rooms that demanded she disappear. For him, it was fractured by thoughts he had long avoided, by the uncomfortable awareness that he had been seen, truly seen, by someone who had nothing to gain from pleasing him. The following days brought subtle shifts. At the restaurant, Mara noticed the way her co-workers looked at her now, not with pity, but with something closer to admiration mixed with disbelief. No one said much, but their shoulders seemed lighter, their movements less frantic. She tried not to let it change her. She focused on her work, reminding herself that moments did not always lead to transformations, that survival still required consistency and caution. Yet, something had undeniably changed within her. She found herself speaking more clearly, setting small boundaries without apology. When a customer snapped impatiently, she responded with calm firmness rather than silent endurance. Each time, the world did not collapse. Each time, she felt a little more solid within her own skin. The men returned the next Thursday, and the air shifted again, but this time it was different. The tension was there, but muted, uncertain. He took his usual seat, but his posture lacked its former rigidity. His eyes no longer scanned the room as if searching for flaws. Instead, they lingered, observant, thoughtful. When Mara approached, her heart still beat faster, but fear no longer led the way. She moved with the same quiet confidence she had discovered days before. He noticed it all. The steadiness, the lack of performance, the absence of the ingrained flattery he had come to expect. It unsettled him more than anger ever could. For the first time in a long while, he became aware of how people adjusted themselves around him, how rooms bent to accommodate his presence.